Hello Year 5, welcome to your second English lesson this week. It's Mrs. Lee here. So just a word of warning, if you didn't do yesterday's English lesson, I recommend you go back and do that lesson first, just because I'm not going to be going into as much detail today as I did yesterday. I don't want you to get lost. So today we're going to be looking at using adverbials, where yesterday was just about identifying the different types of adverbials. So I'd like you to, in your English books, write today's date and the title, and then have a little go at the total recall. See if you can work out what is wrong with all of these sentences. Okay, pause the screen there. Okay, did you work out what was wrong with these sentences? They all actually had the same mistake. On Monday morning, the teacher announced the competition. Under the covers, the children hid from the scary movie. In the middle of the forest, the monkey swung in the tree. They've all got fronted adverbials, and so they should all have commas after them. Remember, if that adverbial is at the front of a sentence, it needs to be followed by a comma. Okay, so just to recap adverbials, adverbials tell us when something happens, where something happens, or how something happens. If you actually look at the word adverbials, they add information to the verb. They modify the verb in the sentence. They can go at the front of a sentence, just like our total recall, and we call that a fronted adverbial. So adverbials modify the verb. They tell us when something happens, where that happens, and how that happens. Okay, so we're going to start off with a little task today. I've got 3 sentences. I'd like you to read the sentence. I'd like you to work out where the adverbial is. So each sentence has one main clause, so the main bit of the information, and one adverbial phrase. And I'd like you to find that adverbial phrase. I'd also like you to tell me, is it an adverbial of when, where, or how? So you can either do that in your book, or you could just talk to somebody that's in your house. Have a little go at that and pause the screen. Okay, he drove to the hospital as quickly as he could. He drove to the hospital is our main clause, and our verb in there is drove. As quickly as he could is modifying that verb, so it's telling us more information about how he drove. He drove as quickly as he could. So it's an adverbial phrase of how. It's not at the beginning of the sentence. It's actually at the end of the sentence. If we move that adverbial phrase to the front, we can call it a fronted adverbial. We must remember to follow the adverbial with a comma. As quickly as he could, comma, he drove to the hospital. Okay, at dawn, I went for a run. So at dawn is when I went for my run. It's a fronted adverbial followed by a comma, and it's an adverbial of when. Okay, well done if you spotted that one. We can also move that adverbial. So we could say, I went for a run at dawn. It's still an adverbial. Of when, it's just not a fronted adverbial. In a land far from here, the giants roam. The giants roam is our main clause, just like I went for a run was our main clause, and he drove to the hospital was his main clause. The main clause is the main part of the sentence that makes sense on its own when you take all the extra bits out. In a land far from here is a fronted adverbial, and it's telling us where in a land far from here the giants roam. So it's a fronted adverbial of where. And we can move that adverbial. We can rearrange our sentence. So we have the giants roam in a land far from here. Okay, if you wanted to add more adverbials, so if we were to look at that last sentence, the giants roam in a land far from here, you could add a fronted adverbial of when. In the middle of the night, the giants roam in a land far from here. And then you would need in the middle of the night, comma, the giants roam in a land far from here. I'm just letting you know, because in your task today, you might want to choose to add more than one adverbial. Okay, so bronze, you're going to choose adverbial phrases of when, so you're only going to be looking at when, and a main clause, so that's the main part of the sentence. You're going to choose those two things, you're going to put them together to create your own sentences. Silver, you're going to be choosing adverbial phrases of when and where, and a main clause to create your sentences. Gold, you're going to be choosing adverbial phrases of when, where, and how to add to your main clause to create a sentence. And challenge, you're going to be creating your own sentences, but you're not only going to be using adverbial phrases, I'd like you to have a go at using adverbial clauses, again, of when, where, and how. I'll explain a little more in a minute about that one. So bronze, this is your activity today. You can pause the screen to use this information to create your sentences. So you've got a list of when adverbial phrases. So yesterday evening, at break time, before long, quite slowly, tomorrow night. And you've got a list of main clauses, main sentences that make sense on their own. We walk the dog. John eats breakfast. Tidy your room. What I'd like you to do is choose one of the when adverbial phrases and choose a main clause to connect it to. Now, if you want your adverbial phrase at the front, you must remember your comma for your fronted adverbial. If you want to put your main clause at the front, you might not need a comma. You'll have to have a read of the sentence, but you probably won't need a comma. Remember, though, you must have a capital letter and a full stop. Okay, so if you'd like to do bronze tasks, you can pause the screen there and use the information. If you'd like to do silver, we shall move on. So silver, you have got adverbial phrases of when, which is like the other bronze task. You've also got where, and you've also got your main clause. I'd like you to use at least one adverbial phrase, so you might want to use an adverbial phrase of when and where in your sentence. Choose your main clause, choose your adverbial phrase or phrases, pop them together to make your sentences. Remember, if you're going to have an adverbial phrase at the front of your sentence, it needs to be followed by a comma. Don't forget your capital letters and full stops. Well done. Pause the screen on silver if you'd like to do silver. Okay, gold. You've got adverbial phrases of when, how, and where with your main clause. Now you can really play about with these clauses. You could put a main clause with 3 adverbial phrases. Be very careful, you might need to pop extra commas in there because you're going to end up with longer sentences. Remember, if you use an adverbial phrase at the front, it needs to be followed by a comma because it's a fronted adverbial. Make sure your sentences make sense and don't forget your capital letters and full stops. Well done. Pause the screen there if you'd like to do gold. Okay, challenge. You're going to write your own sentences today. If you want to go back and use some of Gold's ideas, you're more than welcome to. But I don't just want adverbial phrases from you, which is on the last slide. I also want clauses. So let's just remind ourselves what an adverbial phrase and an adverbial clause is from yesterday's lesson. So a phrase has no verb. So it's got no doing word, no being or having word. It hasn't got was in it or had or have in it. And it hasn't got our traditional doing words like jump or run, running. So an adverbial phrase is a group of words that tell us where, when or how, but they have no verb. Okay? An adverbial clause is a group of words that tell us when, where or how, but it does contain a verb. So I've given you an example of an adverbial clause below to help you. Jumping with joy. Molly received her award. So jumping is underlined there and bold because it's actually a verb, isn't it? You can jump, you can do that. It's an action verb. Jumping with joy, Molly received her award. So that is an adverbial clause because it has a verb in it. It's also at the front of the sentence, so it's a fronted adverbial clause. But we don't have to have it at the front. We could say Molly received her award jumping with joy. You could then challenge people, add on an adverbial, a fronted adverbial of time, when. So you could say last Saturday, comma, Molly received her award jumping with joy. Just be careful with your tenses. Okay, we don't want to mix them up in our sentences. So that's challenge. So if you pause the screen there for challenge. Okay, before you share your work today, I'd like you to just go back and I'd like you to colour code your sentences. So if you've used an adverbial for when, I'd like you to choose a coloured pencil just to underline it. Maybe don't do every sentence, but just show your teacher, look, I can use an adverbial of when, and underline it with a colour, and you can put a little key at the bottom. Or if you've used an adverbial of where, I'd like you to underline it with a different colour and say, look, I can use an adverbial of where in my work, and underline that with a different colour. Again, you've guessed it, choose another colour and show me your adverbials of how. So underline an adverbial of how, maybe just one in each sentence. Okay, and if you've done challenge today, maybe you could underline one adverbial phrase and one adverbial clause, just to really shout about how fantastic your grammar knowledge is. Well done, Year 5. It's a really tricky grammar lesson. Lots of information, lots of big words to get your head around. And I think you've done really well. So don't forget to share your work on Teams. If you've really struggled or you need any help, don't forget that the teachers are there and you can just message us and we'll give you a hand. Have a great day, Year 5, and I shall see you on Thursday for our next English lesson, because on Wednesdays we have science morning. Have a fantastic day, Year 5. Bye.